The interior offensive line for the Denver Broncos is crucial this season if Sean Payton's offensive system hopes to have success. Who will we see emerge as the starting center? And are Quinn Meinerz and Ben Powers the best offensive guard duo in the NFL? We'll tell you why we think they can be on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Broncos Country, what's happening? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you once again to all the everydayers out there in Broncos Country. Thank you for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day every single day. And just a reminder, as always, you can get this show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. So make sure you smash that subscribe or that follow button so you never miss out on fresh, up-to-date coverage of all things Denver Broncos news, analysis, and more every single day, all year long. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by Sayre Bedinger, site expert at predominantlyorange.com. Our training camp position previews continue as the road to training camp begins here for the Broncos. And look, training camp just a couple of weeks away here. The interior offensive line is going to be very important for the Broncos this upcoming season. More importantly, it's going to be crucial for Sean Payton's offense to have success. And it's going to start, I think, with the first three guys on the interior. We'll talk about the two guards and the center position, which right now we don't know who the starter for that position is going to be. But I'd say the biggest storyline here for the Broncos interior offensive line, Sayre, is that Quinn Meinerz, Ben Powers here in 2024, they have an opportunity to emerge as one of the league's top duos if they can perform to the standard in which we know they can. Ben Powers previously with the Baltimore Ravens. Quinn Meinerz, obviously last season, in my opinion, had an all-pro year, is viewed as one of the best guards in all of football and is now in line to play for a contract extension here this upcoming season, which we expect he is going to get. He's a valued part of what Denver wants to do going into the future. These two guys have an opportunity to really carve out a bigger name for themselves if the Broncos run game can get going.
And Quinn Meinerz, Cody, was probably one of the happiest guys in the world to see some of these interior offensive linemen getting big money contracts in 2024 free agency, right? I mean, there were some huge deals handed out by teams to interior linemen, and we're sitting here thinking like, man, $20 million a year for a guard, that's kind of crazy. But such is life in the NFL. Things change. Positions like that, I mean, I can't necessarily say it's on par with quarterback and left tackle and things like that, but protecting the quarterback from the inside out has become hugely important in today's NFL. Why? Because there's so many athletic, terrorizing interior defensive linemen, guys who can line up from multiple spots on the inside and wreck games from that spot. I mean, Aaron Donald is a primary example, but the Broncos go up against Chris Jones twice a year, and there's tons more interior defensive linemen that are causing havoc. So the NFL's response to that is, we're going to pay guys highly that do well on the interior offensive line. Quinn Meinerz is one of the best in the game. I do believe the Broncos have one of the best, if not the best, guard duo in the NFL, with Ben Powers coming over last year. Now Meinerz emerging as one of the best in the league. It's a really great problem to have, if you want to call it a problem, that the Broncos have to pay Quinn Meinerz a lot of money, because how many times have the Broncos paid a big money contract to a guy they drafted in recent years? I mean, let's be honest about it. It hasn't been much. There haven't been many examples of that. So it's time. The Broncos finally have a core player that they drafted who is going to get a big money contract from them. Like, this is not a Draymond Jones going off to Seattle sort of situation. This isn't it's not even on par with the Courtland Sutton move. I think this is a situation where the last time the Broncos paid top dollar, top of the market money to a player they drafted was probably Justin Simmons when they gave him his contract. So yeah, Quinn Meinerz, I think, deserves whatever he's about to get. I kind of hope, Cody, the Broncos pay him sooner than later, though, so the price doesn't just keep going up.
Yeah, I mean, the market every year for NFL positions changes. The value of interior offensive linemen, for the reasons that you mentioned, is definitely a big element I think people have to consider when you watch today's NFL, because of the fact that you are seeing guys play a little bit everywhere. And look, Denver's going to play a tough defensive line in week one when they play the Seattle Seahawks. They're going to play Draymond Jones. They're going to play Byron Murphy. He's going to be in the mix there. And so you want to see early on here in the season, especially with Meinerz and with Powers, granted, that everyone makes it healthy through training camp, is that, hey, these guys, they're dominating. Because if you look at Quinn Meinerz' tape, I loved it because this got brought up by AQ Shipley on the Pat McAfee show several times this past season, because he would just do in the trenches and he would just watch tape of offensive linemen, like who's bullying people. And Quinn Meinerz is a guy who's consistently playing a level of bully ball that you don't consistently see in the NFL in today's game. Like, remember when Quentin Nelson was like the most dominant bully offensive guard in football, years ago? Quinn Meinerz is now maybe emerging into that type of guy. And look, you don't believe me? Ask Max Crosby. Max Crosby, even in that last game where the Broncos got their butts kicked, Quinn Meinerz got the best of Max Crosby on several stunt moves there and buried him in the dirt. And obviously you see on Twitter, I see it all the time. Remember that run that Javonte Williams had against the Kansas City Chiefs? It was in Kansas City at Arrowhead Stadium where Quinn Meinerz is just bullying down, just continuously moving guys. You look at it in the Dallas Cowboys game. Who was the benefactor behind that Javonte Williams run that kept going? It's Quinn Meinerz. He's just a guy who plays with a relentless motor. He flips the switch. And look, I think when you see him take the podium to talk at a press conference, you're like, wait, this guy bullies people? Like, he's just such a calm, nice guy. And then when he puts the helmet on, he flips the switch. You can see it too. Like, there's times where we watch him in team stretch, right when the Broncos getting ready to put their helmet on to get ready to run to like the team period warm up that they're about to do. You just see this gear change in him. And you see it when he sprints. Like, he takes off sprinting. Like, he's just got this another level to him. I like that about Quinn Meinerz. And it tells me that he's a certified dog, because you do have the ability to have a calm demeanor right before you go to war, right? And then when it's time to go to war, put the helmet on, strap in, and he's ready to rock and roll. And he loves to bury dudes. Ben Powers also another one of those guys that, they got, a lot of criticism early on because of how he played in the preseason last year. He looked rough in the preseason, but I feel like in the regular season, going back and watching, I thought he did pretty dang good, to be honest with you, Sayre. And so we'll see if they can emerge as one of the top duos here in the NFL at the guard position. And obviously the bigger question here, who's going to be the center position? I mean, really right now, Sayre, what we've seen in OTAs and minicamp, it's mainly Alex Forsyth and Luke Wattenberg, with Luke Wattenberg getting a majority of the reps that we've seen early on. And those two guys have looked good. But we will go over this here too, Broncos country. What does the depth at offensive guard and center look like here for this team going into this upcoming season? We'll break all that down here on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos. Broncos country, today's episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there at eBay Motors. And look, passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your number one ride or die alive. eBay Motors, they have everything that you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance: superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors, they have you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts that you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guarantee Fit only available to U.S. customers.
The Denver Broncos actually might have some depth on the offensive line in 2024 compared to years past. The depth this year is an investment the team has made considerably over the course of free agency, the draft, undrafted free agents. The Broncos look like they're pretty well set up for 2024 on the offensive line. We're going to talk about the depth that this team has up front offensively on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. But want to say thank you to all of you everyday listeners of Locked On Broncos for making us part of your day, however you choose to do so. Free and available everywhere that you listen to podcasts, or you could watch the show on YouTube. And if you are, a someday listener, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, something like that, bump it up to every day of the week and get Locked On Broncos at the top of your podcast feed and at the top of your YouTube algorithm. And if you're already on YouTube, you know what you might as well do? Go check out Locked On Sports today, because it's going to be streaming 24/7, and it's going to give you localized experts bringing top tier coverage of the teams that you love. Again, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Sports Network, your team every day. Let's talk about offensive line depth, Cody, because honestly, you're one injury away from blank every single year. And I think for the Broncos, it's been a little bit scary to say that when it comes to the offensive line. Not necessarily saying right now that you could just be like, oh, you know what? Yeah, the Broncos could lose this guy and be fine. But they did make some substantial investments in the offensive line, I guess dating back to last offseason with a couple of undrafted players, and certainly this offseason bringing in some veteran help to back up their starters on an offensive line.
Yeah, and it's really all about trying to build the trenches. And look, you got a variety of question marks. You got some proven guys in there, but you got guys that the Broncos internally feel like have developmental talent. And look, if they're not ready to start right away, and obviously right now, I think you look at Denver, the guard position is taken care of. Like, you don't have to worry about, like, we have to look for a future starter or offensive guard, because right now Denver's got the two guys that they envision here for the long term, and Ben Powers and Quinn Meinerz with his extension that is going to be coming up. But center's definitely a question mark. But what does the depth look like in the event that Quinn Meinerz suffers an injury or Ben Powers goes down in any way, shape, or form? Like, the Broncos had this situation pop up a little bit last year. Obviously with Quinn, he had a little bit of that heart scare, which luckily that turned out okay for him. But who are the guys that you have behind him? I think this year, Sayre, it's a lot more of a veteran presence. Now, obviously, the Broncos, they drafted late in round 7, Nick Gargiulo, obviously an offensive guard out of South Carolina. But then they also brought in this offseason, they brought in Calvin Throckmorton, who's got former experience playing for the New Orleans Saints. He's a veteran player from the University of Oregon that is now maybe in the mix there. So, and then you also have Will Sherman, who's been on the team for the past couple of years, kind of that swing guard tackle option here. So Denver really, like, when they're looking at like our two deep, our backup systems here, they're looking at guys that have experience in the NFL, minus Gargiulo, who is going to be a rookie this year.
And speaking of rookies, Frank Crum is somebody that I think the Broncos probably had a draftable grade on at the tackle position. And certainly last year, Alex Palczewski was one of their primary undrafted free agent signings. The crazy thing, if people haven't heard this before, the Broncos have not drafted a true offensive tackle since 2017 when they took Garrett Bowles in the first round. I mean, that's a long time to not draft any position. I mean, that would be a long time to not draft a kicker or punter or something like that. I mean, I know not every team drafts a kicker or punter, but we're talking about the most valuable position on the offensive line, historically speaking, in terms of the way that teams pay guys. The Broncos haven't drafted anyone. I mean, they've tried every possible avenue in free agency, from the Donald Stevensons and the Menelik Watsons and Jawan James, all those sorts of guys out there to try to fix that gaping hole. Mike McGlinchey being the latest at right tackle, but they've not drafted anybody. But I think finally, even without drafting guys, Cody, I feel like there can be a little bit of excitement about the offensive tackle depth. When you look at guys like Palczewski, Frank Crum coming in as a rookie who could redshirt this year, and then DeMontre Jacobs, another player this team really liked after what they saw last year in training camp and the preseason. I like the depth at tackle they have. Calvin Throckmorton can play some tackle for you, has done so for Sean Payton in the past. I like the depth at tackle. I like the depth on the interior. It's not necessarily a situation where you would sit here right now today and say, like, man, you feel good about it if Garrett Bowles or Mike McGlinchey goes down. You feel good about the guy behind there. I mean, I'm not sitting here saying that, but what I am saying is there's at least some intriguing young players on this roster for Zach Strief, the offensive line coach, to mold.
Well, and I think it's all about, can you play guard tackle? Can you play guard center? Like, that's the idea. Like, we talk about positional versatility, and there are so many guys that can do that. You look at Will Sherman, I just mentioned him, can play guard tackle. You look at Calvin Throckmorton, guard tackle. Gargiulo can play guard center. You look at other guys as well. I mean, the guys that you mentioned, Palczewski, like Luke Wattenberg last year, played guard center. He had to step up when Quinn Meinerz went down for the Broncos. So the idea is that, hey, we need guys that can play this or that. That way, if something does happen, because I think that's how important this offensive line unit is for Sean Payton to be able to sustain, to be able to have success this upcoming season. You need to be able to have continuity. And it's like, all right, if this guy falls off, which hopefully that's not the case, like any injury or anything like that, can you have a guy who's capable enough to come in as the backup and your level of play doesn't dip? In an ideal world, that's what every coach around the National Football League is looking for. Do we have guys that can step up if our starter goes down? It's hard to imagine, because you see it happen every year. Like you see teams go down, and like I think you see it with teams that the Broncos have played. Like there's been times when we've been doing our crossover previews with the opponents that we're going to play, and obviously crossover Thursday will be a thing once again here this upcoming season for everyone that listens or tunes into Locked On Broncos. But the idea is that your offensive line has to have guys, has to have capable depth. It's one of the most important elements of the game in today's structure of how the game is played. With all the rules favoring the offense, you need to have quality backups. You need to have depth there. And look, I think when we look at the offensive guards, the guys who can play center in this group, I think Calvin Throckmorton might be the one guy. Gargiulo could be the other guy. I mean, if you look at the Broncos website, they have Quinn Meinerz listed as a guard/center. So I don't know if there's any sort of surprise or, something that maybe we don't know about there. I mean, Quinn has taken some snaps in the last couple of years back in 2022, but primarily he's been viewed as a guard, and he's going to stay as a guard there. I want to go to the center position now here because obviously we look at the depth there. There are three names that are really competing for that starting job. Alex Forsyth, obviously going into his second season in the National Football League. Luke Wattenberg, who's going into yet another year after being drafted in 2022 by the Broncos. And then veteran Sam Mustipher, who spent some time with the Ravens and the Chicago Bears. I mean, right now it's really between Forsyth and Wattenberg getting a majority of the reps with the first team units and the second team units, where Mustipher's kind of been designated and pigeonholed into that third team unit no matter what. So to me, I'm very intrigued about this. Like, it tells me Sean Payton is comfortable with the first two guys that he has there with Forsyth and Wattenberg, and maybe Mustipher's like a, in case something happens type of option, which, I mean, could just be a camp body here.
Yeah, he could be. And I think that that's valuable to have, because if you go in with two guys that have literally no regular season starting experience, that could be a little dangerous. But Mustipher brings a little bit of that, right? With both the Bears and the Ravens. And so you have that kind of added level of competition from a guy who has played at at the highest level. And whether or not he's played super well, I mean, that's up for the offensive line experts to decide. But he has played, and the pro scouting department liked him enough to bring him in. But with this center situation, what it reminds me of is back in 2015, right? And I've mentioned this before, when the Broncos moved on from their previous center and went to Matt Paradis, who spent his entire rookie season in 2014 on the practice squad. And all of a sudden they were like, yeah, Matt Paradis, he's going to start at center this year. And you're like, well, okay. I mean, he was the guy on the practice squad last year, the 6th round pick from last year. Like, he's going to snap to Peyton Manning in a what could be his last NFL season. That's the guy that you're going to have at center. Yeah, Matt Paradis, he's the guy. It's not the same level of, I guess, intensity when it comes to the overall pressure of the situation, but it is a similar situation in that the Broncos are kind of going into training camp this year with a couple of guys that you're kind of like, really, the guy who was a 7th round pick last year who did nothing could start this year at center, or a guy who was a 5th round pick who got bullied in his first NFL game by Chris Jones. He's going to be the starter with a rookie at quarterback. You're going to go with one of those two guys. I mean, that's kind of the same vibe that I'm getting. So it's not that I'm saying it's a bad situation. I'm saying that obviously the coaching staff has faith in these two guys.
And that's something that Sean Payton has expressed. He's expressed his pleasure with what he's seen from terms of the youth at the offensive line. Zach Strief getting more ingrained now as a full-time position coach. I mean, he was doing some of the stuff that we're doing in terms of media, commentary, analysis before he got back onto a coaching staff in the National Football League. So there are a lot of factors that go into this. I think the interior offensive line is going to be very paramount for what the Broncos want to achieve offensively this upcoming season. But now that brings us into the question, how many offensive linemen on the interior at guard and center will the Broncos keep on their 53-man roster? Sayre and myself will share our predictions on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp, and comparison is the thief of joy, and it's easy to envy other people's lives. It might look like they have it all together on their Instagram or their social media, but in reality, they probably don't. Therapy can help you focus on what you want instead of what others have, so you can start living your best life. Life doesn't come with an instruction manual on how to overcome certain things that may pop up in your life, and that's why it's important to share your perspective and talk with somebody who's unbiased on your life. I've utilized BetterHelp therapy in the past, and it was beneficial for me. I think there's a lot of benefits out of using therapy because I don't always have the answers, and it's nice to be able to get some tools that I can use in my day-to-day life to deal with stress, anxiety, depression, things that do pop up for me consistently. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, Give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. As we jump into the fourth quarter action on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, we'll dive into who we think on the offensive guard and center position will make the team's 53-man roster. We just want to say thank you once again to everyone in Broncos country, all the everydayers out there. Thank you so much for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day every single day. If you listen to us on Mondays and Tuesdays, why not bump that up to Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays? Because every single day, all year long, our promise to you is to bring you the best objective, up-to-date Broncos news, content, coverage, analysis, and more. We look at every potential scenario with this team. We look at the good, we look at the bad, and we try to bring it to the middle here for an open discussion with everyone in Broncos country. That's our promise to you, the listener, here every single day on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Sayre, going into maybe our 53-man roster projections here on the interior offensive line, specifically at guard. I'm going to start off here by sharing my picks here. I think that a guy who we didn't really talk about as much, he's kind of like this tackle guard swing option here. I think in terms of who's going to make up Denver's roster, I've got Quinn Bailey. Obviously, I've got Ben Powers. I've got Quinn Meinerz, Calvin Throckmorton, and Nick Gargiulo making up the roster here. Because of Bailey's versatility to play guard and tackle, I think that's something we'll see there. Obviously, we know Quinn Meinerz, Ben Powers, the two starters at that position. I think a veteran and Throckmorton who can play guard center for you potentially, and then Gargiulo, a rookie who's going to develop on this offensive line. I think it's going to be paramount here for them. And then I've got Alex Forsyth and Luke Wattenberg as my two centers here on this team, with obviously, as we mentioned, a guy like Throckmorton, Gargiulo being able to step in at that position if need be. The fact that you have two guys that can play either of these positions, I think maximizes your opportunity to have quality depth here on the regular season roster. That's how my prediction pans out. Your thoughts on that? But I'm also curious to know, who do you have making the roster at guard and at center?
Yeah, I think obviously the top three positions is going to be Ben Powers, Quinn Meinerz, and then one of either Luke Wattenberg or Alex Forsyth. So I think those four guys are going to make this team. And then beyond that, Calvin Throckmorton is another guy that I have making the team as well. Just like you, Cody. I don't necessarily know how many overall linemen the Broncos will keep. I wonder how much of it depends on the kickoff return situation and who plays in those roles in particular. You know, Sean Payton alluded to it and actually kind of just deliberately mentioned that there could be basically an offensive line unit for that kickoff return situation now, because you basically have a play from scrimmage. And so the Broncos have added all these athletic guys. And Luke Wattenberg, super athletic guy. Calvin Throckmorton, very versatile guy. There's plenty of athleticism at the offensive line positions all across the board. But you know who I think could be an interesting swing player when you talk about versatility between guard and tackle? I wonder if Alex Palczewski can do a little bit of that. And I think that there's a potential for it. I don't know that he's necessarily pigeonholed into right and left tackle as a swing guy there. I wonder if he could play a little bit of guard for you. And so he would be a guy that, to me, I would say if you swing between guard and tackle, he would be that final guy on my roster prediction. So Quinn Meinerz, Ben Powers, Luke Wattenberg, Alex Forsyth, and then Calvin Throckmorton and Alex Palczewski. And I'm kind of floating him between the two. I'll be fascinated to see, do the Broncos keep 8 offensive linemen, 9, 10? I mean, I think 8 is typically what Sean Payton has done over the course of his time in New Orleans, but the new kickoff return rules dictate that you keep more guys than that. And so I'd be closer to the 9 or 10 range, maybe even pushing towards the 10 in terms of how many guys they keep based on what they think about the young players all across the board here.
Part of me is also thinking too, because, I had a chance to observe one practice where we did get to see the kick return structure here for Denver, and I didn't see a single offensive lineman out there for the Broncos. Like, you saw a lot of linebackers and a lot of receivers, like big body types. So for me, it's like, does Denver keep more linebackers? Do they keep more receivers or even running backs at this position? Not only just factoring as a potential return option between running backs and wide receivers, but do you keep extra bodies at those positions because they can play this newfound realm on special teams? To me, that's a question I don't have the answer to just yet. But also, I think like the guys, like if you wanted to throw offensive linemen out there, Sayre, you could definitely do that with some of your two deep guys, because a lot of these guys play special teams anyways. Like when you talk about PAT or PA or field goal block, like a lot of these guys, and even on punt, a lot of these guys are playing on the trenches on the offensive line anyways. Like you're not going to see Quinn Meinerz playing on, I think, PAT primarily. You're not going to see him playing on punt. Like you're going to see other guys that are lineman types play at these positions. So to me, I think it maybe makes it to where, all right, hey, we can maybe stash away a couple of these guys on the practice squad. We have options when it comes to building this roster in terms of overall flexibility. I wanted to maybe kind of turn a little bit of a twist here, like to get your opinion. You already mentioned who you think will we already know who's going to start at guard. There's no point in mentioning who we think will. We already know who will. But I want to get your thought, who you think will start at center here for the Broncos. For me personally, I think Alex Forsyth will emerge in that position, though I will say Luke Wattenberg has looked really impressive so far early on. When the pads come on, though, I want to see how both of these guys do.
I'll go, I guess, devil's advocate then, and I'll take the other guy. I'll say Luke Wattenberg. I think, he's been around a little bit longer. The Broncos did trade up to get him in that 2022 draft, which is kind of interesting. They prioritized him over whoever else was available. He's got positional versatility. He's a smart guy. I mean, he certainly has had more time than any of the other young players at that position, meaning I guess that would be Forsyth and Gargiulo. But he's had more time to kind of get up to speed in terms of his getting that physical strength where it may need to be in terms of playing there. And he's kind of been able to see like what didn't work for somebody like Lloyd Cushenberry back in his rookie season and what did work this past year. So that benefit of that experience there, I wonder if that will factor in for Wattenberg and if he could be kind of one of the more underrated breakthrough guys on this team. I think a lot of people have assumed that it's Forsyth with Wattenberg as almost a distant second. But like you mentioned, Cody, maybe it's not. Maybe it's more neck and neck than people seem to assume.
And we'll find out here shortly. Obviously, as the Broncos full training camp schedules out, Broncos Country can attend 16 practices beginning on July 26th. Make sure you're out there in attendance. Obviously, I'll be out there. Hopefully, Sayre can make it to a couple of training camp practices as well. We'd love to interact with all the members in Broncos Country. But let us know who you think will make up the Broncos depth at guard and at center in terms of starters and backup depth. Make sure you drop in the YouTube comments, or you let us know on social media at Cody Roark NFL, at Sayre Bedinger, if you're listening to this wherever you get your podcast. Tomorrow's episode of the show, for all you everydayers out there in Broncos Country, one thing we'll dive into here specifically, the next position on our training camp battles is going to be at the offensive tackle position. Garrett Bowles, Mike McGlinchey back this year. Is the depth behind them good enough? And do the Broncos have a long-term answer at left tackle in Garrett Bowles' potential final season on the roster? We'll tell you who we think that is on the next episode, Locked On Broncos.